Welcome to another show of Celebrate Life. My name is Gary Carolis, and I'm your host. The focus of this program is to show the amazing lives people live and are living. The key word here is live. Everyone has a story to tell, and all stories are worth celebrating. Over the years, I've read too many obituaries that left me pondering, I wish I could have met this person while they were alive. The intent of this program is to celebrate the lives of everyday Vermonters who are very much alive. If you would like to be a guest on this show or know someone you think would be a good guest, and everyone would be a good guest, please contact me at celebratelife0747@gmail.com. Now, I would like to introduce you to our guest today, Anne Lezak. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you, Gary.
We're here to celebrate your life.
Amazing.
It is amazing. Where would you like to begin?
I would like to begin at the beginning.
It's a good place to start.
So I was lucky to be born in Portland, Oregon. And the reason for that is because my parents, who grew up in actually the same building in Chicago, could not wait to get out from under their families and out of their neighborhood and just get into a bigger world. So they had their wedding, and that afternoon they got into this little convertible and headed west. That was their honeymoon.
And they grew up in the same building?
They did.
In Chicago. That's amazing.
Yes. It was an apartment building, and yeah,
Fell
isn't
in
that
love
something?
And headed west.
Well, my dad used to like to tell the story. My mother was 3 years younger, and so she was just the annoying little sister of his friend until he came back from the war he went when he was 17, and he came back at 19, and all of a sudden, who is this, Muriel? So then they fell in love.
Oh,
but, yeah,
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So Portland, why Portland? Do you have any
Well,
sense of it?
like I said, they wanted to get out of Dodge, and I think it's amazing that they made this decision to head as far west as they possibly could. And my dad apparently had looked at jobs in Los Angeles and decided he just didn't really like Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. He had a fresh new law degree, and they considered Seattle. And my dad made He made the decision, which was not true. He thought Portland's going to be the boom town, not Seattle.
Huh.
Seattle ended up being the boom town because of Boeing and all that.
Right.
But I mean,
Portland's not bad.
No, Portland was great. So they just started their new life in Portland and pretty much left everything behind. We had no relatives within, 1,000 miles.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. So that's where I grew up.
Okay. Well,
So
yeah.
Yeah. So I grew up in the 50s and early 60s, and I had that childhood that, the idyllic childhood where you just send the kids outside, there's a million kids, everybody's playing together. I still remember it was a very big deal. My parents gave me permission with a friend to walk the half mile to the there was a kind of a neighborhood shopping area that had where we could buy like penny candy and ice cream, and there was a swimming pool. And I was 7 when I was allowed to walk there by myself, which we did, many, many, many times. And we just, it was the 50s, and everybody was having kids after the war, so we had, all these kids in the neighborhood, and we had one of the largest lawns, so ours was the place where we would meet to play freeze tag and kickball and all these things. So it was a very lovely, nice, and until it was just being built up, that neighborhood. And I still remember, like, we would go pick berries just like across the street in the woods until that got built up. So yeah, it was a great, easy childhood to be a kid there.
Now, Portland is a big city, actually, right?
Yes.
How close to the downtown were you guys?
7-minute drive.
7-minute drive. Wow.
Yeah, and yet we were in this lovely neighborhood that didn't feel like city
Right.
at all. I mean, with big lawns. And actually, my parents and three other people they met, they built their houses together on this hill. So there had been nothing, it was old farmland. And so they were kind of newcomers.
That's amazing.
And they lived in that house for almost 50 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so.
So as a little girl, did you have any thoughts about what you wanted to do when you grew up?
So I remember that I thought I wanted to be a teacher or a psychologist. My mother was a psychologist. Oh. And I did have this normal, idyllic, simple childhood, except for one major difference. My mother was one of the few working mothers, and she was very proud of that, and that was a very big deal to her. Mm-hmm. And in fact, she was quite the snob about it, and so she pretty much put down all the other mothers who didn't work, and kind of like poo-pooed them, and like said while they're eating bonbons and having lunch and going to PTA meetings, I'm doing real work, which she was.
Right.
So, and in fact, she, it's pretty amazing. She got her PhD when I was 6. She had a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old.
My goodness.
And she wrote her PhD thesis on the typewriter in the kitchen so that she could keep an eye on all us kids. And she was like, she was constantly saying, would you kids shut up so I could work? But we couldn't because we were like 5, 3, and 1 at the time.
Portland State University?
No, it was at the University of Portland. That was the only PhD psychology program.
Okay.
At that, Portland State wasn't even, that came in the 60s. That came later.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
And your mother did go on to be quite significant.
My parents were both like incredible leaders in their field. They were amazing role models in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
My mother ended up being she actually ended up being one of the kind of mothers of neuropsychology. And when I was 18, she published her first version of what became this classic neuropsychology textbook that is now in its, she did many editions, and the last one was the 5th edition, and now the 6th edition is being written by the people who she,
mentored,
asked, who she mentored and who she chose because she knew she wouldn't be around forever.
Wow.
So, she was, I remember when I was living in Washington, D.C. at one point, for 5 years, which is another story, she was being inducted as head of the International Neuropsychological Society. And she taught all over the world. I mean, in Japan, Brazil, China. She was, she had an amazing career. Wow. And she was quite the hard-driving professional.
It sounds like it.
Yeah, she was really something.
Did that carry over into her being your mother? I mean.
Oh, yes, a lot. I mean, we had like I said, I had the idyllic childhood where we were outside and playing with friends. But as far as my mother versus the other children's mothers, very, very different. Right. We had a full-time, we called her housekeeper, caregiver, because my mother was working full-time. Right. But she really was a housekeeper. She wasn't, she wasn't there to
raise
fill
the kids
our emotional needs,
right.
and she was there to make sure we were safe, but she was mostly the housekeeper.
Yeah.
So whereas, it was, my mother really poo-pooed the mothers who you would go home and there'd be cookies and milk, and I kind of liked that when I went to my friend's house and there was cookies and milk after school. But no, she was not like that at all, and she made it very clear that she had much more important work to do. Yeah.
So no bonbons for you, Anne?
No bonbons for me. Although she did, it's funny, there were certain things that she was raised in a very traditional family with traditional roles, and there were certain things that she did. She was very proud of the fact that she made us a really good breakfast every morning. That was really important to her, that she sent us off to school And so she would leave like minutes after we did for school, but that was really important.
Yeah.
And she made dinners. That was important too. So
Wow.
she did cook. She didn't need to clean because we had that
Right.
full-time housekeeper.
Wow.
But so there were certain things that she did feel like
Yeah.
were really important.
Was your dad a balance in this? Was he a stay-at-home father?
Oh no, my father was. My parents were amazing.
Yeah.
My father at the age, so he was a labor lawyer and worked
okay.
for unions, and I still don't know how he got connected like this, but at the age of 34, he was chosen by President Kennedy to be the United States Attorney of Oregon.
Oh, that's amazing.
And so he became the chief federal prosecutor at the age of 34.
Wow.
And he lasted through 5 administrations, which is almost unheard of.
Right.
So he was the second longest serving United States attorney for many years. I don't know if he still holds
amazing.
that, but he was reappointed by both Republicans and Democrats.
Wow.
And then when he was 60 and Reagan came in, he said, no, that's a bridge too far. No Reagan, I'm not doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So he quit, and it was actually kind of a struggle for him because that had been such a defining
Right.
role for him for his whole life, and I think he had a really tough year. And then he discovered his next passion, and he really became one of the leaders in mediation in Oregon. And he became, like, he's celebrated still for being one of the fathers of mediation. And he would travel and speak about it, and he mediated some incredible cases like Indian fishing rights, salmon fishing rights,
Really?
on the Columbia River. And he said that the Catholic abuse cases that were going on throughout the early aughts,
Yeah.
I think, he said that paid for many vacations for him and my mother. He was a leader in those too. I mean, really tough,
Wow.
difficult, complicated cases.
Wow.
So yeah, he had an amazing life. And another thing that really is remembered about my father, he was remembered as a mentor to many, many. And he just, like, he would take people under his wing, and they would just remember him forever. He had a bunch of law clerks in the summer, and one of my key memories from the time when I was a young teenager was he'd call up and he'd say, we're bringing people over. And my mother would be at work, but I was home from school. And so I learned from a very young age, like 12 or 13, to get out the cheese and the crackers and cut the cucumbers and have the dip out. And then there would be like this parade of 15, 20 law clerks and assistant U.S. attorneys, and my dad just thrived on that.
Gosh.
And people, he just was so remembered for that. So that would be like all summer long,
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was really something.
Did you thrive on that too as the child?
Yes and no. I really felt like I was the child. I wasn't part of that group at all.
Yeah.
But I do think that what both my parents gave me in that, and my parents did a lot of entertaining. Again, my father would call and say, oh, there's this guy from Turkey who's coming through town. He and his wife are going to, how about they come over for dinner? Of course, my dad didn't cook it all. That was all on my mom, but my mom was pretty good-hearted about that. And they all, they had parties and entertained a lot. And I feel like a gift that they gave me, both of them, is that I'm very comfortable entertaining, and I love to entertain. And I didn't realize that for some people, I've learned that's really hard.
It's intimidating.
And they get very anxious. I remember talking to a friend who said, how can you have this Hanukkah party every year with like 40 people? That would just like send me, and
That's
it's just
no problem.
that, yeah, no problem, because my parents just, they made me understand that it wasn't about, you didn't have to have everything perfect. You didn't have to have the fanciest dishes. You didn't have to have fancy recipes.
Right.
It was about welcoming people
Right.
and being, just being there, and definitely having plenty of food. We always had plenty of food, but
Yeah.
not fancy. But
Yeah.
I do think that was a great
What a
gift.
wonderful gift.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
My goodness. So here, your childhood was quite amazing.
I mean, it was a regular childhood
Yeah.
in some ways, but I had these role models of these parents who were just incredibly hard driving, high achieving
Right.
leaders in their fields. And my father, he was very, very community minded also. He was involved in politics. He supported so many different causes. He was on the board of Planned Parenthood. He was on the board of one of the biggest environmental organizations in Oregon. He was involved in Common Cause. I mean, he just was, I don't know how he did it all, except for, unlike me, he didn't have to cook, clean, or, so,
Right,
that.
right. But I get this image of them when they hit the sack at night, they just crashed. And
They
then
must
they
have
get back
been
up
exhausted because they also were really active outdoors people. They did a lot of hiking, and they both were smokers, heavy smokers.
Really?
And that was all their friends were. That just was
Back in those
everybody
days,
did.
yeah.
And once they quit smoking, it was like they became, I don't know, they especially my mother was very, very strong anti-smoking, but they also okay, now we're going to embrace this healthy lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I still have a picture of my mother. She ran like a 5-mile race in her,
Wow.
they, from being inactive, and
Right, right.
they really got into cross-country skiing and taught, which was another gift. I still love cross-country skiing. They would, we'd go up to the mountain, and they'd have always all these people and friends, and be going on these great group hikes, and
Amazing.
yeah.
Wow.
So they were, and
Wow.
also travel, a lot of traveling.
Family traveling?
Both family and
for their
work,
own,
and then
yeah.
when they were older, which now seems young to me, when they were in their, by the time they were in their 50s,
Yeah.
late 50s, their kids were gone. So yeah, they took just incredible trips, like Kathmandu, hiking in Nepal and that sort of thing. But yeah, I always said and yes, we took long driving trips,
That's great.
which would be a lot of fights in the back seat because there were 3 kids. So
And you're the oldest of the
yeah,
three?
my poor little sister had to always be in the middle. We made sure. Yeah, I'm the oldest, and I was very clear about that. I had certain rights. My poor
Big sister.
Yeah, she really suffered.
So then you school, you get in.
So, yeah, school, I knew from kind of a young age that I wanted to go far away to school, that that was an opportunity to really explore something else. And my mother was very supportive of that. I think for status symbol reasons. She really liked the idea of her kid going off to some fancy school. And my father, I still remember him saying, he said, I really wish you'd go to the University of Oregon, because if you go off to the East Coast, you might end up staying there and marrying somebody from the East Coast, which is kind of interesting because I ended up meeting my longtime husband in Portland, Oregon, and he's from Queens. And we met in Portland.
Really?
Yeah, but that's later on.
Okay,
So
that's
yeah, so
But
I went to Tufts,
Okay.
which I had never heard of.
Okay.
I literally had never heard. Nobody I knew had heard of Tufts
Interesting.
in Portland, Oregon. And the reason I went was because I decided that I probably wouldn't get into an Ivy League school. I wasn't quite there. And my mom we had traveled to Boston. We'd gone to Boston, and I thought that Harvard Square was where it's at. It was so cool, and I just thought, wow, I want to be back there. That sounds really great. And so I said, well, I don't think I can get into Harvard, or I think it was called Radcliffe at that time.
Right.
And then my mom had a friend, I still remember, her name was Emily, and she came over, and for some reason, this Emily had gone to Tufts, and she sat me down. I think my mother put her up to it and said, you should go to Tufts. And and of course, in those days, there was no internet.
Right.
So
That's right.
I knew, and we didn't visit schools before we
Right.
went to them.
Right.
That just didn't happen.
Yep.
So I did apply to a bunch of schools, and I
You got
ended up going to Tufts.
Wow.
And I still remember, the airport. I was 17 years old, not
Jeez.
even yet 18, and going to the Portland airport with my, no, I guess they sent a trunk. They sent a trunk, and then I had my suitcase, and just getting on that plane by myself and heading off to the great unknown,
Right.
which was really something.
And your father, it sounds like he was a little bit heartbroken that his daughter.
No, he was fine with it.
He was
by
fine
then.
with
He
that?
was okay. Once,
Okay.
well, no, he was. I mean, he would have loved me to stay in Oregon, but once he was fine.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, he got on board.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right.
So it's funny because I had met this young guy that summer, the summer before we were applying for colleges, and he went to Middlebury. And the more I learned about Middlebury, because I was already really into camping and hiking in the outdoors, I thought Middlebury sounded wonderful. My mother said, no Middlebury. We can't visit you there. That's too far. That's in the middle of nowhere. We're not coming. And yet what's kind of funny is they visited me once. My dad was.
Is that
my
right?
dad came twice.
While you were in Tufts?
But I wasn't even, I actually didn't stay there.
No.
No.
Oh.
I left after 2 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was not the right school for me. It's interesting because I do feel if I had visited, I would have understood that I should have
Yes.
gone to a school more like Middlebury.
Okay. Where did
So-
you transfer to?
So I stayed 2 years at Tufts, and in retrospect, I really think I was homesick. I really think I missed Oregon. And it's interesting, I had 6 friends from my high school who went back east to school,
Yeah.
and only one stayed, the one who
Interesting.
had a full scholarship to Harvard.
Interesting.
The rest of us went back. Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
Huh.
So, yeah, it is kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean,
Did
who
you-
knows? But I went back and I didn't know what I was going to do, and so I actually did something called University Year for Action, where I was It's kind of like a domestic Peace Corps.
Yep.
And I was sent to Eastern Washington, Cheney, Washington, 30 miles east of Spokane. Wow, that is
Wow,
really, that was quite a contrast from Harvard Square, I can tell you that. Unfortunately, that program was really poorly run. It was terrible, and it fell apart in several months. So I didn't really know what else to do. So then I went to University of Oregon. And once I got there, I realized this is a great school for me. I love the professors. I felt like the professors at Tufts, at least the ones I had, it was such a hard driving atmosphere that I felt like everybody there was like, publish or perish, have the neck, you got to be doing all this stuff. It wasn't what I had pictured. I pictured with an Eastern school that there would be like sherry hours with the professors, and they would take us under their wing, and it wasn't like that at all. And yet I did find that at the University of Oregon. I found professors who really cared for me, and I ended up, I didn't know what I wanted to major in, but I ended up majoring in psychology. And after one course, my psychology teacher hired me for the summer to do this really cool series of experiments. It was so fun. So, I mean, I had some great experiences.
Wow.
So, yeah, and I liked I liked being back in Oregon.
Did you get involved in government or student
So,
government?
no, I didn't. I volunteered both at Tufts and at the University of Oregon, and I had a really, I felt already that I just wanted to, I don't know, this is very naive, but help people. You know, I didn't even know what that meant, but
Right.
that was something that was always important to me.
Yep.
That I just felt like I wanted to, I don't know,
Yeah.
and learn about people who were different from me. So somehow I found this program where I was matched with a woman who had just come out of prison. And we had zero training. Zero. I mean, it was just like, okay, here's your match, off you go.
Wow.
So I visited her. I mean, here I was like, 19, 20 years old. And so I visited this woman. She came to my apartment once a week. And we just visited.
Hung out a little bit.
Yeah. And it was really, something. It was really interesting. I mean, I went to some like student demonstrations and anti-Vietnam War stuff, but no, I wasn't really engaged and involved that much. But that was an.
So you were opening your eyes to a bigger world, and this was one way to do it, is to meet someone from a whole different background.
Yeah, actually, I volunteered in Boston too at Tufts. Oh my God! Again, we were just like, I wanted to volunteer. I mean, I didn't know anyone who volunteered, but I also, one thing that I did do at Tufts was I worked at a restaurant in Harvard Square, and that was a really good experience for me.
Great.
That was really great. It was so different from school, and I met so many. That was really a good experience for me, and just kind of grounded me in what the working world is like, and what like real people who have to make their way, like being a waitress. What would that be like? And I mean, if there was any question that I was going to finish school,
So Tufts was close to in Boston.
Tufts is right outside of Boston,
Boston.
and I could easily take a bus
I'm
in.
glad that you got your Harvard Square experience, even though you didn't go to Harvard.
I did, and these obnoxious Harvard boys would come in. They would be at the tables, and they would just, and I would say, you guys, you just, I don't know, you just treat me, so poorly, like you treat every waitress, and it just gave me it was just interesting,
Another group of people.
Yeah.
All right. So you.
So I graduated the University of Oregon. I had. Oh, I know what happened. What happened then was, in high school, I was also volunteering. I was volunteering for different things, and one thing that I volunteered for, which was amazing, was there was something new in Portland called Outdoor School. Every sixth grader, which it still is going on to this day, which is amazing. I mean, we're talking about like 50 some years later. It was a revolutionary, wonderful program. Every sixth grader goes to outdoor school with their class for a week, and they intentionally mix up different groups. So kids from different socioeconomic
groups,
parts of the city are together. So it's 3 or 4 classes at a time, and there were 4 or 5 outdoor school sites, and they took high school kids as volunteer counselors, and I did that, which was amazing.
Wonderful.
So I just fell in love with outdoor school. And actually there's something else that I did in high school, which was kind of unusual. I still can't believe my parents let me get away with this, but I had a friend who was very outdoorsy and into camping and hiking and all this. And he talked his parents into letting him do a 2-week trip, spring break and another week off school, throughout the whole Southwest. And he brought his younger brother and sister with him. And he invited me.
Wow.
And 8 of us kids went and we like went to the we climbed to the bottom of the Grand Canyon and
Jeez.
camped there for
Wow.
3 nights. We went to Las Vegas.
Wow.
We went to Arches natural.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, just these beautiful, amazing Utah places. And we were on our own.
8 kids.
8 kids.
On
The
your own.
oldest was
No
18.
adult.
No
Holy
adults.
mackerel.
And I still remember trying to talk my mother into this. She said, "This is ridiculous. No way. No how that. Why would you?" And my father said, "I think it sounds great." And so, yeah, I mean, I'm really lucky I didn't get into more trouble. I mean, there were some drugs, there was some drinking.
Yeah, yeah.
And anyway, it was an amazing trip. So I think from then, travel has been a big part of my life. So anyway, after college, actually, before I even got a job, I ended up working. No, I worked for the outdoor school. So I loved outdoor school. And so after college, I went to outdoor school and I was able to work for them, not as a volunteer counselor, but they hired people to work.
Yeah.
They had different resources that the kids explored: plants, water, and soil. So I became like, I don't know, just, I worked in one of those areas.
Yeah, right.
And they would have a naturalist, someone who actually knew what they were doing, to teach us.
Right.
And I loved it. I did it for 1 fall and 1 spring, and it rained all the time because it was Oregon. It was Western Oregon, and we were so wet, so cold. I was sick every single weekend. We'd go home for the weekend,
Jeez.
and I would be so sick, and I would just sleep the whole time. And then I'd come back because my voice would be hoarse, but I absolutely loved it. I loved the camaraderie. I loved the bringing together of these kids. I loved these kids who had never been out in the woods. Just discovering how incredible nature was. I loved the silly plays, the singing. It was a fabulous, fabulous experience.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And then I still can't exactly say what motivated me, but I kind of felt I needed to take a huge trip all by myself. And my goal was to be gone for a year.
Wow.
I made it 10 and a half months.
Wow.
I went to Europe by myself.
Wow.
With my backpack.
Wow.
And I was 21.
Wow.
So I saved all the money that I'd earned at outdoor school, and I went off by myself, which I still, like, looking back, what got into me? I don't know.
10 and a half months.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it was really quite an adventure, and there were wonderful, wonderful times when I met amazing people. Just for example, I mean, it's unforgettable. I was feeling very, very alone I was in Strasbourg, Austria. And I remember putting out the map, because, that was the days of maps.
Yeah, right.
And I called home like once every 2 weeks. It was,
No cell
there was no
phones,
cell phone.
no,
There was
exactly.
nobody. And I remember putting out the map and saying, if I disappeared, no one would even know I was gone for like a month. And I remember just looking at this big map and saying, I could go anywhere. Where am I going to go? Anyway, I remember I found this beautiful hike near Strasbourg, and I hiked up this mountain feeling actually very sorry for myself and very alone, and like, why was I doing this? What's the meaning of life? All that kind of stuff. Like, I'm like this tiny little dot alone in the world.
Yeah.
I got up to the top, and this busload of kids comes out in Austria.
Yeah.
And they took me under their wing, and they were from Germany, from southern Germany, and they brought me back to their village.
Oh my goodness.
And I was put up by this, I don't know, somebody in this little house, and they wanted me to stay. It was late fall, and they wanted me to stay and learn German, and they said I could easily get a job because it was a ski area. Mm-hmm. And I really considered it for 2 weeks. I mean, these people were amazing in this little village. It was incredible. But I decided not to. I decided to go on.
Okay.
But I mean, I just had incredible.
Filled your heart with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just one of,
Wow.
like 10 experiences like that.
Wow.
I also had really scary, awful experiences. I spent my time, I went to a kibbutz, and I was planning to stay for 2 months, and it just was
Not good.
I wasn't welcome. I purposely picked a small kibbutz that didn't have many guests because I wanted to be, have it be very real.
Sure.
And I forgot that, if you can't speak Hebrew, which I couldn't, what are you doing there? And if you have no skills, which I didn't.
Oh my goodness.
So anyway, that was a really tough.
Wow.
I only stayed. I think I lasted a month, and I was going to stay like
Wow.
3 months.
Did you keep a journal or anything during this
I
time?
I have some of a journal, but not that much. No. So anyway, that was an amazing.
What was your global takeaway from that experience?
I think my global takeaway was that I can rely on my own resources, and that the world really is a small place, and that people will take you in, and if you kind of make yourself available and are friendly. And then I also, again, there were really close calls. Like I've even told you the story about the couscous, where somebody grabbed my backpack and walked me into his house, and they were gonna,
Not so nice things.
yeah, and I just started like screaming and crying as loud as I could in French. I did know some French, and somehow I scared them, and they let me go. So there were some very scary experiences too.
Wow.
But yeah, I certainly learned that I need people, and I rely on people, and I was able to rely, find people who I could rely on in strangers coming together. And I think people are there for each other.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And they were for me in many
amazing.
ways.
Yeah.
So
Did that time help you crystallize where you were going to go next? with
oh
your life?
no.
No? Oh, no. Why would that happen?
No, I really didn't know what I was going to do. No, I guess I maybe hoped it would, but no, it didn't. And it's funny that, I had these parents who were so career focused and so successful. I almost think that it was almost too much. Like, I couldn't even imagine, how did they get like that?
Yeah.
And I couldn't even, it was, yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Did you go back to Portland?
I did go back to Portland.
Yeah.
And Portland was a touchstone for me at several times in my life when I've gone back to Portland. So I went back, and I got a job working at a residential treatment center. And I worked there for 3 or 4 years. So in those days, I still remember, so a residential treatment center, this is basically a jail for kids who are acting up but don't have enough mental health problems that they're not in the mental health system.
Yeah.
And they haven't done enough illegal things that they're in the juvenile justice system.
Right.
But there was this gray area, which is pretty terrible in retrospect, where kids, they were called status offenders.
Right.
So they would be like running away from home, hanging out with older boys, skipping school, drinking, and all things that were, bad behaviors. But so in those days, and I hope it doesn't still happen, I fear it might still, and I worked in the girls section, these girls would be sent away for like forever, for like 2 years. Wow. And they came not only from Oregon, and Oregon is a very big state.
Yes.
We had kids who lived 8 hours away.
Yeah.
And we had kids from Alaska, and we had kids from Idaho and Montana. And we also had kids from Portland. But many of these kids, and we completely demonized their parents. The parents were seen as bad. Yeah. And that, thank God now we have them, and we can, make up for these bad experiences they have. Oh, but I still remember one question that I asked, that I think has been kind of a through line in my work since. I asked in my interview, I said, what happens to these girls after they leave? And you know, the answer, which is just amazing, was we have no idea.
Wow.
So there was no data, nothing collected. They, you know,
Wow.
the
No
director
follow-up.
said our funding ends when
they walk out the door.
when they leave.
Yeah.
And that's it. So I said, so you have no idea like how your, you know,
Right.
how your work is. I mean, that just
Wow.
really stuck with me. I still feel so
Right.
strongly, and I think that really helped me
Yes.
kind of find my way to eventually doing a lot of work where I was looking at outcomes
Yes.
and data and
Yes.
trying to teach other people how incredibly important it is, and how, especially in really hard things like you know, like this, where you can't, you know, if you're keeping a kid out of their home for 2 years,
Right.
how does that impact on their later life, and
Right.
how do you measure that?
So you saw a gap in quality of care, basically, in data being the qualitative and quantitative data that
Right.
that really captured.
It just,
The
I mean,
lights went on for you.
yeah, I mean, I have used that example so many times in so many different teaching situations, because, and I mean, everybody was well-meaning.
Right.
They really were. But I mean, I was a, you know, 22-year-old know-nothing, and here I was in charge of a hall of these poor, I mean, these girls had such complex, traumatic,
Yeah.
terrible, difficult experiences, a lot of them.
Yeah.
And we were just like trying to get them to, I don't know what, just.
Right.
And I'll tell you another
Interesting.
thing that hit me too. This place was run by Catholics, and we were not allowed to talk about birth control.
Oh dear.
And so, you know, some of the girls got pregnant,
Wow.
and then we just sent them away.
Wow. Yike.
So we would, I talked to some of the staff, and we would secretly talk to them, but we couldn't do any, we couldn't bring them to Planned Parenthood.
right.
We couldn't pay for anything. So,
Wow.
yeah. So anyway,
So then where do?
so I ended up getting promoted, and I was the activities director, and this is weird. I mean, why they would combine these two jobs. I was the activities director and the development director, the fundraiser. I had no clue about fundraising. I had, you know what, I left out a whole job. I forgot. I completely forgot. I forgot that I first worked for the, I worked for a youth service center, and I had done I did camps for them. That was right after college.
Yeah.
But anyway, activities director, I was great. I
can
knew
imagine.
how to do, you know, I was always an enthusiastic, like, let's do games, and let's do, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was, and we did beach trips, we did hiking trips, we did all kinds of cool things with the kids, which was really, I mean, introduced, you know, a lot of these kids, they're from Oregon, they'd never been to the coast. Mm-hmm. How ridiculous was that?
Yeah.
So we brought them to the mountain, we brought them to the coast. They'd never, you know, been able to, I don't know, go see just some iconic places in Oregon. So that was really great. So by then I had met Harry, the guy from Queens,
The guy from Queens.
who was in Oregon. He was in his final year in medical school
Okay.
at University of Oregon Med School, and yeah, I met him, and he chose to do it. He wanted to be in a bigger city to do his internship, and I was kind of ready to be moving on and doing something else. So we actually moved to Boston together, where he
Okay.
did his internship. So there I was back in
Back
Boston.
to Boston, right?
Yeah, and that was a really hard year. I really had trouble finding work that I liked. I applied for lots of jobs, but I don't know what it was. I don't know whether it was recession or what happened, but it was, I had a lot more trouble finding a job than I thought I would.
Huh.
And I ended up being well, first I worked at a bakery in Faneuil Hall. I met a woman on the subway on the way, the T in Boston, on the way from the airport, because Harry was already there. On the way from the airport, I met this woman, and she hired me right then and there to work at the bakery, which is ridiculous. So I worked at a bakery in Faneuil Hall. That was interesting while I was looking for work. And then I quit that, and I substitute taught, and that was wild and crazy in Boston. I mean, I would come into a class of like 30 fourth graders, and there would be no note for me or anything, and I would just have to like, now what, you know, it was not a good.
Not pretty.
No, it was not pretty. So anyway, I ended up getting a job with the Head Start, which I was hired for a Head Start center that wasn't open, and it didn't open, and it was very badly managed, and I was really unhappy. And Harry was gone all the time or sleeping because he was an intern.
Right.
He ended up leaving the internship, which is unusual, and we went back to Oregon.
My goodness.
Yeah, he decided that he didn't want to be in internal medicine.
Okay.
So he worked for a year. Yeah, and that's when I was at the Youth Service Center. That's right. That's when I was at the Youth Service Center, and I actually liked that job. I was doing programming. That wasn't earlier. I was doing all kinds of programming for kids and running camps, and I ran an employment program. I really liked that job, and I worked for a great boss, and it was really good. And Harry decided that he wanted to be an ER physician after he'd worked for a year in an ER, even after just that. So he entered the program in emergency medicine. So he had, I mean, not the program. He did his residency.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's at the point I said, well, you know what? I'm like 25, 26. I got to figure out what's next. I'm not going to stay at this youth service center forever. What do I want to do? And my father, who always gave really good advice when I asked him, and I don't even know if I asked him or he may have even nudged me, and he said, well, what are you going to do? You know, what's next? And he urged me to take a public administration course with his friend who taught at, it happened to be Lewis and Clark College. That was something I'd never thought of and never heard of. I didn't even know what that meant. But I said, well, what the heck? I'll take one course. Why not?
Right.
I loved it, and I loved the teacher. He was wonderful. And so I ended up taking one course at a time. I remember my parents offered to help pay, and I said, no, I'm grown up. I have to do this. So I did it one course at a time because I wasn't getting paid very well, and I still had to work. And then I ended up getting an internship through the program, through the Masters in Public Administration program, where I worked at Bonneville Power Administration in conservation, which was obviously a complete switch for me.
Yeah.
And I worked there half-time, and then they paid for 3 courses.
Jeez,
so
beautiful.
anyway, I worked for the Bonneville Power Administration for a year and a half, which was interesting. And they offered me a job, but I felt like I wasn't a numbers person enough that I could really do that. That wasn't me. I wanted to be in a more of a people thing. So then Harry and Harry was finishing his residency. I was finishing my master's, and Harry again wanted to go to a big city. I was happy to stay in Portland. I would have been very happy to stay in Portland. There are so many things I love about Oregon, and I have dear friends. I still have very dear friends there. But Harry said, we have these degrees. It's time to head out.
Launch up.
So I applied for something called a presidential management internship, which I think is still ongoing. 120 new graduates from MPA programs are hired throughout the country. And I got that. And Harry got an internship. Harry got, not Harry got his job at George Washington University Hospital.
Okay.
So off we headed to the big city.
D.C.
Yeah, and that was an amazing experience for me. That presidential management internship is an incredible opportunity. It's a fast track program of 2 years, and you're with a cohort. You get training. You can try out different places. It was really incredible.
A topic or area that you're interested in within an office that you might find yourself.
And because we were free, everybody wanted us.
Absolutely.
So I ended up working for the National Institute of Mental Health, which was called then. It's now called, as you very well know, the Center for Mental Health Services.
Yeah.
And I worked in mental health financing with this incredible go-getter guy who was brilliant. And it was just at the beginning of, I won't even go it, but it was a new health financing system called the DRGs. Mm-hmm. And everything was going to be completely different, and it was going to, upset how things, anyway, it was fascinating. But I realized that mental health financing was not going to be what I really wanted to do. So I disappointed him by saying, you know what, I heard there's this new tiny little office opening. It's the office for homeless people who are homeless and have mental illness, which in those bad days, we called the homeless mentally ill. So it was one person was starting that office, and it was in a little closet. And she was very happy to take me on, and that's Irene, who you knew.
Oh, that's right.
And she was another hard-charging go-getter, just knew how to get things done.
Yep.
And Irene, working with her, and I give her a lot of credit, but I learned a lot. And really, it was just Irene and me. And we created the Office of Homelessness and Mental Illness for the federal government because that was right when deinstitutionalization was happening, and all the funding was going from, the states were emptying out the mental
from state facilities to community-based programs.
Right, in theory.
In theory.
But what many states decided to do was, would we rather have a community-based program or a new freeway?
Yeah.
Would we rather have a community-based program, or would we rather pour it into our higher education? So that money never, there were wonderful ideas for how that could be,
The contract never, the social contract never happened.
Right. So people were pouring into the streets. It was just horrible. And so we created, we had conferences, we found experts who, kind of created models, and we did some, funded research. It was an amazing time to be with the federal government. Meanwhile, we were also starting a family.
Right.
And so I had one baby and then a second baby, and I was commuting an hour each way.
Oh my goodness.
And it just was untenable on the
Red Line?
Yeah, I had to change at Metro Center.
Yeah,
it was a really long commute. It was from Arlington, Virginia to Rockville.
Oh, right.
As I used to say, Harry and I somehow compromised. He had 2 stops, and anyway, it was that hour long, and we had I could do a whole hour on the child care.
Yeah.
Oh my God, the child care challenges we had were amazing. So at one point after I had the second baby, but we both also, we hated the heat. We hated the summer heat. And we hated the traffic.
Yep.
And I just did not have a feeling of community. I was never home.
That's right.
Because, nobody was home. We were all commuting and on the road. And Harry and I looked at each other and we said, this is not where we want to raise our kids. And I did not want to raise my kids in air conditioning.
Right.
That was not, I didn't want my kids to be inside all the time or just taking them to some fancy private pool or something. That just wasn't.
Yep.
So we decided to move. And where do you think I wanted to move?
Portland,
Oregon. I would even have moved to Bend, Oregon. Harry's parents were 10 years older than my parents, and he was the only son of Chinese immigrants from New York City, and he made a really strong case, which I understood. And my parents, like I told you, they were inveterate travelers. I mean, they would just pick up and travel at the drop of a hat. I mean, I think my mother probably went to Paris 40 times.
Oh my
I mean,
goodness.
You know, they were just amazing.
Yeah.
So I knew that they would just, you know, they were going to Europe all the time. They would just stop and see us wherever we were.
Yep.
So we decided to move to a smaller town in New England. And I'm thinking Portland, Maine, Burlington, Vermont, Manchester, New Hampshire. And Harry finds this job in this little dot in the map. I had spent one night in Vermont, winter camping in college. And Harry had spent I'd spent like one, anyway, I'd been to Vermont once, and Harry had been to Vermont once for one day.
Right.
We knew nobody.
Right.
And Harry finds this job in Rutland, Vermont, which I had never even heard of Rutland, Vermont. And I'm like, oh boy, this is not going to work out. This is not me. Mm-hmm. And I made him, anyway, to make a long story short, I made him promise me that if after 2 years I didn't find work I liked and a community I liked, that we could move. Mm-hmm. We stayed there 24 years. And the only reason we moved was because Harry got a job in Burlington.
Right.
So we left. I still miss that community. It was an incredible community.
Yeah.
And I just feel like, I also feel like it was a gift to my kids to learn, and I see them playing that out in their lives now, to learn what it was like to be very privileged in a community where so many people were struggling. And I mean, you know, people couldn't believe, like, you sent your 3 kids to Rutland High School, which I did, which we did. And I just think the thing that my kids lacked, and which is unfortunate, is that there was no racial diversity.
Right.
My kids were the racial diversity.
Right.
Like, I think we doubled the population of Chinese people in Rutland County when we moved there. Yeah. But we had incredible economic diversity, and my kids would learn things like, you know, when it was spring break, you don't tell your friends that you're flying to Florida. You don't talk about that. I mean, your classmates.
Right.
But I mean, there certainly were other privileged kids, and of course, many of their friends were people who did have money. But like I among other things, I was a Girl Scout leader. I was working the whole time, but I was volunteering a lot. And I mean, I still remember we had the neurologist daughter and the daughter of a woman who lived in a trailer next to, like, right near the school, and everybody knew that she had a really, you know, just all kinds of serious problems. And, you know, so those kids were together for 7 years in Girl Scouts, and I think that was a good thing for my children.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
anyway, I did find many like-minded people, and also, I mean, we just were able to be outdoors so much. I still remember when we first got to Vermont, like the second week, we went to Half Moon Pond State Park and camped there. And anyway, it was a really
connected a lot of the things that you liked.
Yeah, and that's where you come into the story.
Oh, well, actually, we're going to have to stop.
Yeah, actually, it's probably, so never mind. We'll never know.
Why don't we stop for today? And I'd like to have you back, because there's a whole lot of life that you have lived.
Yeah, because I'm old, like you.